Hey guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. Today's video is a pure tech video, and it's dealing with something that's not very common. And I almost wanted to title it 99% of the people don't know about this. But whenever you see any of that stuff on YouTube where it says 99% of the people don't know about it, what it really means is they don't know about it. And so I didn't want to do that. This is a less common problem, but I promise you many people know of it. I don't want to be arrogant and say 99% of people don't know about this, because that is not even close to being true, which is a note. If you ever see that on YouTube, those people don't really know what they're doing. Anyway, so I'm going to get to that, but because this is a tech video, this one's going to be a little bit longer and it's probably more wordy with me talking. And I mention that because if you go in the comments complaining that I talk too much or this was too long to explain something that should have been explained shorter, chances are I'm probably going to remove you from my channel and you'll never see another thing. You won't see the dyno videos where I simply show you this intake did this or these heads did this. You'll lose all that. You know why? Because in the famous words of Danny Glover, I'm too old for this shit. If you complain about something you got for free, then that's on you. You have the choice to watch this or not. So just keep that in mind. I want to make this longer because I want to explain it to the best way for you guys, so that you guys don't avoid this, because this is not a head porting video. This is a head assembly video really on what to avoid, because this is really what it comes down to, is when you ordered parts and if you got the wrong things. That's essentially what this is. So let's get after it now. So a customer sent me in these heads. These are GM Performance parts. They are the big block Chevy aluminum heads. These are the newer ones. If you got an older set and they might have a Winners logo on those were cast long ago. These are not the same. These ones, I can go ahead and tell you, are the Edelbrock Performer RPM rectangular port heads. That's all that they are, which does create one of the problems that comes up with this, because the problem really is related to this valve, and of course the camera's not going to focus. I want you to pay attention from here to here. There's our problem, and we'll get to this less rare. I mean, it is rare problem, but more known. So anyway, he sent these in for me to do a refresh. The customer did, and eventually, by the way, I'm going to flow them, because I know several of you want to know what these actually flow. I'll be happy to share that, but I need to clean them up first so I could do that. But he sent me in, and I went to tear them down. And usually, when you take off the spring, you could push with your finger on the tip of the valve, and it should push out and slide out through the guide. On 3 of the exhaust, this being one of them, it was did not want to push out. And whenever that happens, there's several reasons for it. One could be that the valve is bent. I've seen that a bunch. The other reasons, you can name it. So there's sometimes the guide's too tight and you just grabbed it. But usually that means there's an issue in some way. So on 3 of them, it didn't. And when I pulled it out, this was the issue with that valve. And I want you really to focus on, which if the camera would focus, that'd be great, from here to here. You see that? By the way, there's other signs that there might be issues. So this problem is caused because of 2 issues coming together at once to force this to happen. And I'm going to deal with both. One, this being an Edelbrock casting, and every Edelbrock head I've ever had come through the shop, I can tell you the guides are too tight. And I know you're probably driving around with it right now and it's probably working for you okay. And you never know that there's an issue. When I measure the valves and then also the guides, there's not enough clearance. It might be fine for the intake, but it's never fine for the exhaust. And that can cause a problem if the guides are too tight. So what can happen is, and a lot of people think it's when an engine gets warm. Not necessarily. It's usually actually when the engine's cold. Because when aluminum's cold, it actually contracts. And so what that will do is it will actually contract around the guide, which these are all carboned up so you can't really see it. But it will contract around the guide and actually close it up, and you lose clearance. So it's not necessarily the heat, it's when it's cold. So you go out and say like a 32-degree day, and you're gonna go, or I don't know, if you're in the north, you're much colder, I'm sure. You go out on a really cold day, just start up your car, just start up during the winter or something, and it starts up and it runs okay, and then you start hearing a tick, and you wonder, what was that? Well, it's because it's cold, and the valve heated up faster than that head did, because aluminum also takes a lot of the heat out. So then it sticks, because that valve grew more than that guide did, and you stick a valve. So it's usually when it's cold, not when it's warm. However, you can have it where that happens when it's warm, and that happens where the valve is expanding faster still than the guide, because you put a lot of heat to the guide to the valve, and the guide, because aluminum again, is taking out heat faster, so it's smaller and then it sticks. But most of the time it actually happens when it's cold, not when it's warm. So that's very common. So the Edelbrock heads, tight guides. It makes me nervous every single time when you do those. So usually when I get that Edelbrock head, I remount the guides to a larger size so that it works. The intake's not so bad because as an intake, you might remember, they have a cool intake charge that always goes through them, so that the valve itself is usually about the same temperature as the guide, usually a little bit even colder. That is not the case on the exhaust, obviously, because it gets the heat. So usually it doesn't stick to the intake, it's usually the exhaust. So at least exhaust guides need to be reamed. Now, that's one of the issues that caused the problem, but that's not the only one. This is the other one, and this one's huge. The reason why you see this rust here to here has to do with this other issue, which is hugely important. So I've got another valve here. This is just an AFR valve. It works fine for demonstrations. This is called the undercut. You can see where the stem itself drops off and you have an undercut. The reason why valve companies do this is two reasons, really. One's weight reduction. If you remove this material here, the valve itself ends up weighing less. The other one is because the stem's less diameter here, it's less blockage for the port and it should flow more. However, I personally wish that no exhaust valves would ever have an undercut. And I know you're like, well, then the valve would weigh too much. Brodix valves, for instance, have no undercut on their exhaust. They don't have them on the intake either. But as a note, even with no undercut on the exhaust, this exhaust valve still ends up weighing less than the intake valve. So which one do you think is going to go into float first, the intake or the exhaust? That's right, the intake. Also, if you have a good cam grinder or a good person that's doing your cams, they will tell you do not need an aggressive exhaust lobe for your camshaft, because your open upper gets pressure and usually just breaks stuff. So I have never seen, and I've talked to several cam guys too, where an aggressive cam lobe on the exhaust makes more power. Usually it just breaks stuff. So point being is, I don't really want the undercut on the exhaust, but a lot of companies still keep putting it in because also it's opening under pressure. So, and the exhaust valve has got all this pressure it's opening against, and now you have a thinner material here, and that could cause it to, that's right, bend. Now, does that happen all the time? No, it's extremely, extremely rare. But this one caused part of it. I'm only showing you this because that's factor 2 that plays a part into it. Factor 3 is this. The reason why you saw this rust really bad, I mean, the whole valve's bad, but really from this point up where it's really getting bad is because of this. So I'm going to use this valve to show you. The way that the exhaust valve gets the heat out of the valve is two ways. One, it contacts the seat and it will transfer the heat through the seat. A lot of people think that's the only way, but that's not it. The other one, the major one, is the guide. So I've got a guide here. And what happens is the guide's sitting over it, and as the valve moves back and forth, it's transferring the heat to the guide and out through the head. However, this is the problem. You want the guide, I'm trying to show you, to never come below your undercut. Do you know why? It's because it won't transfer that heat where the undercut is. Because as long as it's making contact with the valve, it's transferring heat. If you go below the undercut, it's not transferring heat where that undercut is. So as it's going back and forth, it's transferring less heat when the valve's further up into the head when it's closed. So it's closed, it's like this, open to be like this. Transferring heat, transferring less heat. Get what I'm saying? And so when it's down and it has this step like this, that created this. That's why it's rusty there and right through there. Because in that spot, if I put it through here, and I don't know how well this is going to capture, so bear with me on the lighting here. I'm probably going to have to get my flashlight here. Of course, it's black, so you can't see nothing. Doing my best to hold it, and this isn't going to work. Can you kind of see it? I hope so. I'm going to push this valve in. If you watch. There's our undercut, which you could barely see. If you notice, there it is. See it? And all the way in. You could tell where that rust is. See the rust? And in. So what happened? Let's see, it's getting stuck getting there. Well, The reason why it's rusting is because of two things cause condensation. And if you ever wonder what causes fuel dropout, you have to understand the principles of condensation and why that happens. It's a change of matter. So change of matter happens usually because of a temperature change. So you can make a temperature change, by the way, if you increase the area, by the way. So if you take an air gun and you spray it out in the open air, because now the molecules in the air are farther apart, it's lost its kinetic energy. It doesn't have as much because they're further apart, so it cools down. And that's why you see the mist when you do an air blower. That should help some of you guys if you're trying to figure out why fuel is falling out of your port. If you have dramatic changes in port size, that's what does it. Burr finish, all that, it's changes in sizes and then the temperature. In this case, the other thing besides, it's always a temperature change. So if you have a change in temperature, and usually that can happen because of an increase in area, you'll have condensation happen. The other way that can happen is the temperature change being that the guide itself up here is cooler than the air here. So if I have, which is going to happen, when you have fuel, water vapor always is in the exhaust, it's a byproduct of the combustion burn. It's in the form of vapor, but if it touches anything cool, it will go from a gas to a liquid. So up in the guide, it's cooler in the guide, obviously, than it is in the port, because the port's got all that heat. Well, up in the guide, because they got all the cooling and stuff, that water vapor that was in the port, in the air, now turns from a gas into a liquid and forms right here. And that's what caused that rust in the top of that guide. So that's why that happened. So what's this mean? Well, a couple things. These three all played in a factor of causing it to stick a valve. One, the guide's too tight. If it was looser, this probably wouldn't have happened anyway. Because even if, which this still would have happened, but it wouldn't have stuck because it had enough clearance where it's still expanding, because the valve is not taking out as much heat because the guide's not wrapped around enough. So there's problem one. Because it's not transferring the heat, the valve's growing. So that's problem one. The guides are too tight, problem two. Problem three, because of this, you're gonna get that rust forming there. That's three, and those combined to cause the problem. Any one of those three going away, and this probably would have been an issue. It wouldn't stick a valve. Because if the guides were open up more, this valve would still grow, but it would have enough clearance where it still could go back and forth. Now, granted, this would still happen. You'd still have the rust there, which would cause another problem later on, like breaking the valve, which it's about to do on this one. But also, if the guide was further down or further up where it wasn't making this and could make contact the whole time, wouldn't be a problem. Or if the undercut wasn't so high up, wouldn't make an issue either. So all three come together to form that problem. And what's this got to do with the entire thing? This. When you order valves for your heads that you're getting ready to assemble because you want to do it yourself, you're a DIY guy, look for the undercut on the exhaust. And the thing is, most companies do not list how far up that undercut is. And because each company has a different depth on how deep they put their, which you can't see it, how deep they put that exhaust guide protrusion. So even if you knew, you don't know. So it's kind of one of those trial and error things. Now, I don't want you to think that it's horrible if this undercut comes up into the guide, because several of mine do, because it's just nature of the beast. Sometimes you can't find a valve that has that much undercut. But what I don't want to see is that one's a lot. That's like 300,000-400 thousandths. That's a ton. That's way too much. So that's something you want to avoid. So still, this probably would have never caused an issue besides rusting, which probably took many years to occur. And it wouldn't have ever stick a valve if it had more exhaust guide clearance. So one thing to look for, try to get ones that just have a straight stem, which it's extremely rare. They usually have the undercut. It's not the end of the world, like I say, if it comes up a little bit through it. Promise it's not. Several of mine have been fine like that, but that is a lot. So if you got one that's way up there, I'd say time to return it. Yeah, you're gonna eat the cost of returning a set of valves. It's gonna suck. You might have to wait longer to get parts, but in the end, you'll be happier. So what happens, by the way, if it keeps running like this and you had enough guide clearance? So assuming you had enough guide clearance and yeah, there was like the undercut's way up into the guide, what will end up happening is just this. Eventually, and I bet you this didn't take a year, now probably more than 5 years before this even came close to forming. Especially if you're drag racing, I don't even know if that ever would happen. But eventually what will happen is it'll start rusting here. Eventually this valve gets weaker here and it will bend, or it will break, and then your whole engine's gone. Does it happen in drag racing use? No, I bet you could wear out your short block before you'd ever have a problem there. Just saying. But on a street deal where you're driving for years, decades, you're gonna end up, it's gonna bite you in the rear eventually. So my solution, I'm just gonna switch his to a different valve. Probably gonna use a Brodix valve, to be honest with you, because they're straight stem, just to fix some of that problem. Although, like I said, the undercut's not the end of the world. There is another option. You could always get an Inconel alloy too. Those are much stronger and probably won't have an issue. So was this Marine deal, by the way? I know somebody's gonna ask. I don't think so. He was driving on the street. So anyway, a little bit longer video, but I thought I'd explain that because it's a really odd deal, something to think about. So watch the undercut on the exhaust. You guys remember, I'm no Superman. You guys take care.